security events like the attacks in Beni, the attacks on the Butembo and Katwa ETCs, and obviously the latest round of attacks in Butembo and Katwa. We are anticipating a scenario of continued intense transmission. We have managed to get our operations up to a level that they were before the unfortunate death of our colleague Richard, and both in terms of vaccination, surveillance, and other interventions like IPC. But it is not easy to sustain such an effort, both in technical terms and financial terms, at the current time. We need stronger national and international efforts, both at technical and financial level, to sustain this response, to scale this response, and to finally end transmission and stop the outbreak. Our funding gap is quite, for all agencies, is difficult. For WHO in particular, we've had to, through the last number of months, deal with an escalating series of costs associated with having to take on roles and responsibilities, supply chain for Ebola treatment units, staff support for Ebola treatment units, extra security costs, extra transport costs, and we've had to take on a number of responsibilities when other agencies haven't been able to continue. At the present time, our original estimates for the Strategic Response Plan 3 were approximately $57 million. They now exceed $88 million and are continuing to grow. As of today, we have received $34 million and have a current, urgent, critical financial gap of $54 million. That's despite having spent over 35 million of our contingency funds since the beginning of the year. We continue to do that in order to sustain the response, but that is not an inexhaustible fund, and at the current time we have reached critical levels in our contingency capacity to support the response. The response involves, at the moment, tracking over 12,000 contacts per day, over 1,000 alerts per day, vaccinating over 1,000 people per day in over 21 affected aires de santé, some of which are quite geographically separate, and many of which are in extremely difficult security environments. We're adapting, we're scaling, we're evolving the response to adapt to the security situation. So, for example, instead of going into some of the most extreme areas, we're bringing people out and vaccinating them in pop-up vaccination centres. We're moving diagnostic capacity and early care capacity closer to the community by having transit centres, smaller community-led transit centres closer to the population. We're scaling up our vaccination initiatives and currently looking at various options for shifting the current use of the RVSV vaccine and potentially introducing another vaccine into the epidemic zone in order to support containment. We're scaling up the infection prevention and control efforts, and many of you will notice a large grant from the Paul Allen Foundation in the last couple of days, which is specifically aimed at leveraging the medical student population in North Kivu and training them to participate in infection prevention and control activities in the hospitals. We continue to work with the lead in this area, UNICEF, and community engagement to continue to scale the local Ebola virus committees, which are now established in all of the aires de santé affected. We still face major issues of community acceptance and trust, but let me state clearly in this, we still have high levels of acceptance of vaccine. We still have high levels of acceptance of safe and dignified burials, and it's a testament to the people of Kivu and Andy Turi that they continue to accept at over 90%. I think for other vaccines like measles, if we had over 90% coverage, we'd be doing quite well and wouldn't be facing the massive outbreaks we're facing right now. Equally, having your loved ones taken away to be buried by a burial team is very difficult to accept. The fact that over 90% of families accept that, again, is a testament to the acceptance of individual families. A lot of the resistance, a lot of the acceptance issues are driven by political rivalries, communities being instrumentalised, a lack of bipartisan political engagement in driving this as a national crisis, as an epidemic that requires all political parties and all persuasions to come together to support the response. We do welcome in the last few days that President Tshisekedi has put in place a multi-sectoral ministerial committee for the coordination and response to this disease that includes ministries well beyond the Ministry of Health, including the Ministry of Interior, the Ministries of Defence, the Ministries of Social Affairs and others, so that there will be more and more an all of government-owned response, and we've received assurances from all parties that they will engage in a bipartisan, non-politicised approach. Communities, especially in North Kivu and in Ituri, where there are large groups that support opposition parties, need to be assured that all parties are supporting the public health response and that Ebola should not become further politicised in this process. The Director General has spoken of this many times in the last number of days. So scale, speed in what we do operationally, evolution of what we do, innovation in what we do, is what WHO is trying to achieve with our partners. The security and political solutions need to come from elsewhere. The financial solutions need to come from elsewhere. We call on our international partners to support us in generating the necessary political, security and financial platform on which we can do our work in public health with our technical partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. We'll start with questions. Jamie first, and then Ben.
Interim, whether or not the tally has topped the significant symbolic milestone of 1,000 since then. Please, what can you tell us about that?
As of yesterday, this morning it had not, but we expected to exceed those numbers likely today. Did I answer your question? Yeah, there's no predictions in this, but we haven't exceeded the 1,000 as of this morning, but we will likely exceed that today when we see the numbers later this evening.
Ben?
Hi, Ben from AFP. I know it's a region that's extremely complicated, but I just want to parse a little bit about what you said about insecurity and resistance. Part of what you said seems to be post-election tension residue on a political basis, but another part of it is militia groups that have been in that region for years and years before any of these politicians emerged. Mm-hmm. Can you sort of break that out? To what extent is something like a long-standing rebel group like the ADF the problem, and to what extent is it political tensions that's the problem?
I think it's a mixture of all. I'm not a political scientist, but I have been on the ground for nearly 6 months, so I probably have as much knowledge as most outsiders. But it's a very, as you know, a deep, long-standing conflict in that part of the world. The ADF were based very much to the north, around Beni to the north, in Wicha Commander, and as an insurgent group are not of the community and tend to attack the community as much as attacking government forces or others. In the last number of weeks, the insecurity has been around Butembo and Katwa, and a lot of that has been generated by other anti-government forces, Mai forces, which are much more disparate, many more groups. Many of those groups are in current negotiation to be normalised or reintroduced into the government system, into the army and other things. Some groups are not in the process, and it's not clear to what extent some of those groups may be associated with political objectives or otherwise, and how many of those groups are involved in criminal activity and how much there is a mix between both. Coming from the country I come from, I fully understand how complex those issues are. Many of the Mai groups, depending on the area you're in, have much more influence on them from the community. There are many areas in which Mai elements are much more localized and are much more likely to take the words of local chiefs, to take instruction to reduce activity based on what the community want. And in other areas, there are other groups that are less disciplined, less connected to the community, and much more likely to engage in independent activity that may be against the community's wishes. And that is that sort of armed elements. We had another attack, or attempted attack yesterday on one of our ETUs in Butembo, which was dispersed and repelled by the increased security presence that's been on the ground, and nobody was injured, and some of the assailants were captured. That's very different to the understandable community tensions that have emerged. But those community tensions can be driven and manipulated by political concerns. It's one thing being frustrated because you don't have enough resources, you don't have access to education, you don't have access to healthcare, you've lived in an unstable place for years and years, and you feel that everyone has abandoned you as a community, and you feel frustration. And when Ebola teams arrive, people say, quite rightly, well, Ebola's your problem, but we've got other problems here. And those community tensions exist in any situation in which you come in as an outsider. And in general, we're able to manage those tensions by dialogue, by engagement, by explaining what we're doing, by trying to bring other services. But when communities are being directly manipulated, when communities are being instrumentalized and driven down certain paths, then that becomes directed, and that's the difference in this case. There's an element of natural, understandable, and totally justifiable community frustration. And we need to do every day a better job of explaining ourselves and ensuring that communities understand why we're there. But there is an element of political manipulation of the feelings and the emotions of those communities. And that ability to amplify genuine community concerns, to generate responses that are politically motivated, I don't know that there's a country in the world where that's not happened at some point in the past. Now, I'm not there to judge that one way or the other. Our job in WHO is to protect and serve vulnerable people, to protect the world from Ebola. And in doing that, we can only identify the obstacles to that. And we're not saying that the only thing in the world is security. We need to improve our performance too. We need more technical partners on the ground. We need to focus on improving every single day what we do. But it's very hard to focus on those improvements. It's very hard to focus on doing your job when you don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. You don't know whether the next armed group that stops your vehicle is going to shoot someone. You don't know in the morning when you wake up how many of your friends will be coming home this evening unscathed or uninjured. So we need the humanitarian space in which to do our job with our government partners, with the Ministry of Health, with the NGOs. And as I said, we call on all national and international actors to create the conditions in which we can do the job we have been asked to do, which is to stop Ebola.
Thank you. There are a number of questions. First, Laurent.